On today's show, we're going to look at how to make some simple shop-made mortising jigs. And this was recorded from a live event, so if you see that it's shot a little differently, that's why.
Hit it!
You're going to have a lot of situations where you need a creative way to get a mortise in a location that's not all that convenient, and you're probably going to use your router to do it. But a router needs to be guided. So if you've got, let's say, mortises that are right near an edge like this, well, this is good because you can use an edge guide with your router. You could mark start and stop points on the workpiece itself and just kind of eyeball it to get it close. But there are times where you want absolute consistency. You want something that tells you when to stop and start, or you bump into a guide that tells you when to stop and start. Or sometimes the mortise is in a location where you can't really use your edge guide. Maybe you're making a through mortise. I use the technique like this on my Morris chair, where that front leg tenon comes up through the arm, and you need to be able to route in a very specific location. So it can be really helpful to know how to build your own guides, your own jigs, to guide the router and make it go exactly where you want to go with perfect repeatability. Here's another example. This is one of the demo pieces I used for the display cabinet recently, and I needed these little notches in the leg because a shelf is going to go into that leg. So I needed to do this four times on 4 different legs. So what I found to be the easiest thing to do was to build a jig that looks like this. Now this is just out of plywood scraps, nothing special. And that's the cool thing about this. I make these on the fly. There isn't a whole lot of thought behind it. It just basically, this is our fence. It goes against the workpiece like this. I have a center line to tell me where to go. Clamp it in place. This piece back here acts as a stop, and then the router bit just goes in, cleans it out, and then I just remove the clamp and go on to my next one. Pop it in, route, and I'm done. And you can see there's just not much to this jig. Have you ever seen green and green pieces where they have what they call a waterfall detail? So the legs actually have an indentation that looks like a little ramp. It just gets deeper as it goes toward the bottom of the leg. Well, this is the jig that I used for that, right? Pretty much the same principle, but the idea is it's meant to slide down on top and cradle the leg. The leg goes up inside here, and the sides of the jig are what guides the cut, right? And you've got your start and stop points built into this as well. The way this works, and the reason it works, I'm taking a close look at this. Right, this is the key thing. Of course, there's a straight bit in there, but the real magic is this guide bushing. I use these all the time. Now I've got a little set here. This one's sold by Rockler. You can get this probably from various router companies, but it comes with a whole bunch of different guide bushings, and here we go. They look like this. So it's got a collar that goes around, and most router bases, they will come with, or at least have available, a base that accepts these, and they're pretty standardized. Even Festool, who's like, one of the companies that prides themselves in their proprietary products, even they include this little metal piece in here, which takes these standard Rockler guide bushings. Now, the only thing you really need to know is the offset. Okay, in order for the bit to fit inside there, obviously there needs to be clearance. So if you're designing a jig, you need to know what the distance from the outside of this guide bushing is to where the bit is cutting. And usually it's about a 1/16 on each side, right? And if you had a smaller bit, or maybe you had a bigger guide bushing with the same size bit, that figure changes. And you need to know what that figure is. This is a toilet paper roll. This is our guide bushing, and here's our bit. So the idea is you've actually got a very set distance between the outside of the guide bushing and where the bit starts to cut. Okay, and that's the figure that you need to know. And there's just another great use for toilet paper rolls. Okay, so in this case, it's a 1/16 of an inch on both sides of my bit. So if you were to do the math on that, if you're designing a jig, let's say we want a 3/4 inch notch on this leg. I want it to be 3/4 of an inch wide when it's done. So how wide do I need to make this gap here? Right? The guide bushing is going to come in contact with the side. We know it's a 1/16 per side, so it needs to be an 1/8 inch oversized. Bless you. Nicole's sneezing over there. It needs to be an 1/8 of an inch oversized, right? So instead of 3/4, I make this gap 7/8, and I center it where it needs to be centered, and I'll know that this is, with this guide bushing intact, it's going to actually cut a 3/4 inch notch. So you always have to do that math to figure this type of thing out. Okay, so this is an example from the Morris chair where I needed to put a square mortise just in a very awkward section, and I wanted to have exact locations for these walls. So just putting an edge guide along here wasn't really cutting it for me. So I came up with a jig that allowed me to do that very thing. And that's essentially what I've got here. So the great thing about this process is all you need is plywood or MDF, just stuff you have laying around. This was all one piece of MDF. So essentially, I cut a couple strips. How big these are kind of is a reflection of like your router base size. This is the platform that you're building. And you're gonna put these pieces on the inside. So when this jig is finally together, you have to just account for where your clamps are gonna be and how big your router base is. But most of mine, as you can see, from this one, most of mine come out to be about this size. So I cut a couple of strips just at the table saw. Then I got to cut these guys. Now, these are essential because whatever the width of this piece is reflects how big that opening is going to be, right? And the way I calculated that based on my router and my guide bushing is I add 1/8 to it. So whatever my desired dimension is plus 1/8, that's the width of these inserts. And we're cutting them at the same time and then cutting these two pieces apart. So I know that they're absolutely the same width. I also mark center lines on here. If you have center lines inside your jig, it's very easy because then you just measure and mark on your workpiece where is the center of this mortise, and then you have them there for reference. Here's another thing. I took another little piece off of the end, cut a little nub off of there, because I want this to be square, right? A through mortise that's nice and square. So these are cut to a particular dimension. I cut this extra piece off, turn it this way, and I could use that here as a guide to make sure the distance in the other dimension is exactly the same, essentially ensuring that I have a perfect square now. This obviously does not get glued in, it's just a spacer. Here is a piece of sycamore, and let's assume we want a nice square right about there. The crosshair is very easy to find. If you're making plans for this, you know the center point in most cases, that where you actually want that mortise or the tenon to poke through. So if you have a set of crosshairs, those crosshairs are going to line up with what we have in our jig, and we'll be able to get it exactly where we need it to be. All right, so if you're going to do this operation, you need sacrificial material because your bit's going to go all the way through. So you want to be using some kind of either plywood or MDF or something underneath to just catch the bit as it comes through. You also need to do that because you need full support on the back end of this workpiece, otherwise the router can cause a lot of tear out as it pokes through this. So if you have another piece of material nice and flush, it's going to give you a pretty clean result here. And if you ever wonder, a lot of people ask, why do I have the split top in my workbench? You're seeing why right now. Remove the template. You see what we're left with. Nice and clean at the top, nice and clean at the bottom. Now, of course, a router creates rounded corners. You would need to square those corners up, but really 99% of the work is done, and the dimension, because we use the template, the dimension is fixed. Right, so if I'm trying to size a tenon, I can actually be pretty confident that all of the tenons I need for this project can be made to the same size because I know all of my mortises are going to be made with this template and they'll all be exactly the same size. So imagine applying the same concept to making a simple jig for a standard mortise, where you could basically cut the middle piece to match whatever the combination of your guide bushing and router bit requires. A lot of times what I'll do is make this middle section the exact dimension of the guide bushing. So if you do that, there's only one way for it to go. You plunge down, put the guide bushing in, and push it across. So if you're doing a standard mortise and tenon, you just use a 1/4 inch bit, and then use whatever guide bushing you have, make the channel the size of the guide bushing, and that bit now has a place to travel. And all you're doing with these is these middle sections, it's dual purpose. It's creating the width of the channel, but it's also serving as a start and a stop point as a guide, right? And that's what makes something as simple as this really one of the best things you could know how to build, and it's just made with scraps. So no matter what kind of mortise you have, no matter where it is, if you've got some plywood scraps, you could make yourself a little mortising jig. And really you're just limited by your creativity. This is really just the tip of the iceberg.